Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please. Welcome to the 2026 Ultimate Tech Showdown, sponsored by TTJ Tech Services and Stir It Up Studios. Now, make the popcorn, grab the sodas, and please take your seats. We are about to begin.
Fasten your seatbelts. Get ready for liftoff.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Get ready for the Ultimate Tech Showdown! Tonight, 4 tech nerds go head-to-head for the coveted prize, bragging rights! Now let's bring our panelists into the ring. In the ring tonight, from Comcast to Blazy Technologies and teaching children to writing product documentation, he comes to us with nearly 35 years experience. Tonight, he put down the Doctor Who book to battle it out for the best technology. Put your hands together for David Goldfield. Next up, it's another assistive technology instructor. For this guy, it's all about helping students master the skills necessary for independence and employment. He comes to us from the Chris Cole Rehabilitation Center, but can he rehabilitate your love for Windows and Android? From Austin, Texas, it's Kevin Ratliff. He is a highly respected assistive technology specialist, educator, and the guy who likes to stir things up. From Stir It Up Studios, please welcome Cliff the Spoon Miller! Okay, get in the cage, Cliff. He is a certified Apple teacher and an assistive technology trainer. This guy is the only tech you'll ever need. At least that's what he likes to tell people. From TTJ Tech Services, it's Matthew Volbrecht. One more round of applause for all the panelists. Give them a hand, folks. Give them a hand.
Ladies and gentlemen, to present our debate rules, please make welcome to the virtual stage, Cassidy.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 2026 Ultimate Tech Showdown, sponsored by TTJ Tech Services and Stir It Up Studios. This evening promises to be fun and entertaining, while also being informative. Before we begin, I'd like to go over the rules and procedures for this debate. Tonight, our 4 panelists will answer questions that you have submitted concerning various technology platforms or operating systems, hardware, screen readers, app availability, and more. Our moderation team has selected the questions from the numerous submissions we've received, and we thank you for sending in all the questions. None of the panel members has had access to any of the questions at any time, so all panelists will be hearing their questions for the first time tonight. For this evening's debate, we will use the classic debate format. To begin, each panelist will have 5 minutes for opening remarks. The order of the opening remarks has been selected at random. Following opening statements, Kathy from our moderation team will begin reading the questions. Each question will be directed to one particular panelist. That panel member will have 2 minutes to answer the question. Following this, each of the other 3 panelists will receive 1 minute to make a counterpoint. Finally, 1 minute will be given for further rebuttals or clarifications. Our moderation team will inform each panelist when 15 seconds remain and when time is up. After all questions have been asked, each panelist will receive 5 minutes to make a closing statement. Please stay tuned after the closing statements for a final word from our sponsors. During opening and closing remarks, and when a panelist is answering a particular question, there are to be no interruptions from other panel members. Only during the final minute for each question may multiple panelists speak with each other. These gentlemen are all professionals, so I'm sure that won't be a problem. At least I hope not. Once again, we'd like to welcome our distinguished panelists tonight. If you'd like to learn more about them, please read the newsletter announcing this event, which contains all panelist bios. We'd also like to thank David from Sky's the Limit Communications for his work as our soundstage coordinator, as well as a big thank you to our moderation team, Sarah, Kathy, and Ed. Now, I'd like to turn things over to the debate moderators.
Remember that we will begin with opening statements, 5 minutes for each panelist. Following that, first, each of you will be asked to respond to a technology question in your area of expertise, Apple or Windows. You may ask that the question be repeated if you did not understand it. Second, you will have 2 minutes to respond. You will hear both a verbal 15-second warning and/or sound indicating that your time will expire. Third, once the question is answered, there will be a 3-minute free-for-all when each of you can jump in to rebut, counter, or add any information you feel relevant. Again, you will hear both a verbal 15-second warning and/or sound indicating that your time will expire. This format will be the same for all questions and answers. But please remember, this showdown is intended to be informative and at the same time be enjoyable. Be courteous whenever possible. And our first opening remarks will be from Cliff Miller. Cliff, you may begin.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. I am I guess I gotta say part-time, mostly Mac user. There we go. I teach Windows during the day, and I grew up on Windows, but back in 2011, I switched over to the Apple ecosystem, which I only went back to Windows for employment and teaching purposes. Windows has its place in the corporate world, but I teach a course called More with the Mac. You can go to my website, stirredup.com, and check it out, because I believe that you can do more with your Mac. There's a couple of people on here that might think otherwise, but we'll get to that. Anyways, I originally was born in Chicago. I grew up in Minneapolis, and now I live in Austin, Texas. So my technical background is I've been teaching probably for about the last 15 years, been around it most of my life, which is about 35 years. So I think I know a few things. I don't know it all, but I know more than most. So that is my intro.
Thank you, Cliff. Next, we have Matthew Volbrecht. Matthew, you may begin.
Well, thank you very much. And I really appreciate the opportunity here to be part of this awesome event. Thank you to our moderators, everybody on the production team, and certainly to all of you in the audience who have given your time to attend this evening. If I were asked to walk into a room and do an audit in which I were to take the very best features of a Macintosh, an iPhone, of most modern tech products out there. If I were asked to do this audit and I were asked to come up with a device that blends the best of each device while removing the things that are not really needed, the device I would walk out of the room with would be an iPad. 16 years ago now, when Apple introduced the iPad and Steve Jobs presented it as what he called a magical and revolutionary product, it was clear that he invented the iPad in order to fill a gap that could not be filled by a PC or even a Mac, to fill a gap that could not be filled by the largest gaming machine, or the smallest netbook. For those of you who don't remember netbooks, they were sort of sub-laptops. To fill a gap that could not even be filled by Apple's own iPhone. When Steve Jobs stood on that stage and introduced this revolutionary magic product, he said it's got to be better than a Mac and better than an iPhone at doing some key tasks, or otherwise it has no reason for being. He claimed the iPad was that answer. And when I got an iPad in my hands, it took me about 5 seconds to agree with him wholeheartedly. But what's even more amazing is that since that time, back in 2010, Apple has continued to revolutionize the iPad. And the iPad each year has grown by leaps and bounds, both in capability and in power. And what we're finding is that no matter what the area of technology is, when we put the iPad to the test, it comes out on top. Wherever we give it a chance, it excels. Now, you're going to hear a lot of questions tonight, but I am confident that by the end of this session, the only question you'll have left is, can I please go order my new iPad? Thank you.
Next, we have David Goldfield. You may begin now, David.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to this great debate. And I'm still smiling over the intro. That was just awesome. So, hey, tonight I'm here to talk about Windows, and I'd like to open with what I think are some of the key benefits and advantages of Windows, particularly as it connects with us as blind, visually impaired consumers. So one thing that I really like about Windows as a benefit is that you have a choice of screen readers. Yes, you have the built-in narrator from Microsoft. You have the built-in Windows magnifier, and they're not bad. But you also have a choice of third-party screen readers and magnifiers, JAWS, ZoomText, NVDA, and we can't forget Dolphin Supernova. So this means that you're not just tied to Microsoft for your accessibility. You can go with third parties if you want to do that. The screen readers can be independently updated, independent of the operating system. So that means that if my screen reader vendor needs to release an update tomorrow, they can do that. I don't have to wait for Microsoft to release an operating system update to improve my accessibility. JAWS and NVDA in particular offer a robust scripting language. This allows you to write custom scripts to let those screen readers work with otherwise inaccessible apps, and those scripts can also add functionality to those screen readers that they otherwise would not have out of the box. JAWS in particular has been around for 30 years, so it's a very mature screen reader. It has seen a lot of development and refinement. And finally, I'll have more in the closing statement, but NVDA is open source, which means that the community itself contributes to it. Thank you very much.
And our last panelist is Kevin. Kevin, you may begin.
Hello, I'm happy to be here today. My name is Kevin Ratliff. I'm from Austin, Texas. I'm an assistive technology instructor at Chris Cole Rehab Center. Before I started working at Chris Cole, I did a lot of other independent assistive technology teaching. I am a longtime Windows user. I've used everything from Window Eyes to JAWS to Dolphin to narrator, NVDA. So I've tried to learn all of the screen readers, everything about Windows, the Office suite, and then also ventured into the Google Workspace area. So I have experience with Classroom, Docs, Sheets, Slides, all of that. And then I started with Android, never owned an iPhone, never wanted an iPhone, never wanted an iDevice of any sort. and I am still here today, and I've never considered switching at all. I know that makes everybody in here mad, but I don't care.
Well, I know what I'm going to get you for your birthday next year. Then.
It will stay in the box, and you'll find it sitting on your desk.
Matthew, critics say that while the iPad is a powerful device, it is severely limited by iPad OS, that iPad OS limits pro-level workflows. How do you respond? You may begin.
Well, I think it's a false narrative. I think that as you look at what Apple has done, for example, this year with iPad OS 26, bringing a full-fledged menu bar, bringing true multitasking, bringing complete file and folder management, the continuity with iCloud and the other features, the ability to work with multiple iPads or an iPad and a Mac or iPhone in the mix, what have you. And it becomes more and more clear that that just simply isn't the case. The other thing that I would say about that is that where the iPad shines is simplicity without sacrificing power. And so whether you're a 3-year-old or a 93-year-old or anywhere in between, whether you are a teacher, a student, a doctor, an airline pilot, a business owner, you're going to find ways to do what it is that you want to be able to do with your iPad. You're only going to be limited by your imagination.
The only thing I can say is the one reason why I sometimes dread listening to Matt Volbrecht is because I know that when he's done, I'm going to want to go out and buy an iPad. And that's what I'm struggling with right now after hearing what he just said. So other than that, I got nothing else.
Come on in, the water's fine.
I can't because I own an iPad. So.
Okay. All right. With that in mind, we'll then move on. Kevin, you have the next question. Android can run on a very large number of devices made by a massive number of manufacturers. Does having so many hardware options empower users or create inconsistency?
So with the Android ecosystem and it running on so many devices, it is united by one thing, and that is the TalkBack screen reader when it comes to accessibility. But having it run on so many devices across many different price range and specs does not limit it. It does contribute to the power of Android. There's Android Go, there's just the regular full-fledged Android. And oftentimes people get caught up on well, my device is slow and this and this and this. And then I went to an iPad or an iPhone and I noticed a speed increase. Well, yeah, you also notice an $800 price increase. So you went from a $45 Android phone to a $900 iPhone and you expect the same performance. That's not realistic. But the fact that TalkBack 16.2 runs on any Android running Android 12 or later unites the experience. And much like on Windows, it is updated independent of the operating system. So they add features, whenever they want to. They just pushed out a 16.2 update, and we're still sitting on 16.0 for the OS. So there's no limitation. You're only limited by the specs of the device. So don't pay, $50 and expect $1,200 performance.
Yeah, I really like the tone we've had with all of us being so kind to each other, and I certainly want to keep that. So hopefully you can respect my disagreement while recognizing that I still love you. But therein lies the problem, is that when you allow an operating system to be customized, it's not just the specs and the power. You make an excellent point, my friend, about the specs and the power. I would agree with you if that were the only issue. But when you allow each manufacturer to put their own spin on your operating system, in my opinion, You are just asking for trouble. And that's why we see my device can do this, your device can't, or my device looks like this and yours doesn't. Whether you buy a $300 iPad or a $1,300 iPad, it's going to run the same, you're going to be able to support it the same, it's going to have the same features and functionality.
But that is only because of the specs that they put in there to ensure, because they controlled, it's a walled garden. So they control the experience out the door. Android is able to be put in people's hands who cannot afford a $300 iPad. They can take a $100 tablet and do the same thing that you're doing. They can access the same internet. They can buy the same things. They can order their food for delivery or whatever they want, because you're basically making an argument against Windows when you make an argument against Android, because there are just as many Windows manufacturers and they slap the same operating system on every phone.
I'm happy to make an argument against both. Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
there are 109, but the experience is the same. Now, if you get a $199 stream or $99 HP stream or whatever, you're not going to get the same performance as if you get a $2,400 PC or whatever. But the overall experience is going to be the same. You're still going to have the same capabilities. And if you use JAWS or you use Narrator or you use NVDA, you're still going to have Picture Smart or whatever you want to be able to use. So that's the same thing with TalkBack. It's controlled by the accessibility feature.
So I don't know if we have any time left, but I just respond to that by saying we had a really, really old iPad from like 2012. My wife said, let's sell this. Even if we sell it for $50, she said, there's got to be somebody who would be willing to buy it who can't afford a more expensive one. I said, honey, I love you, but I'd be embarrassed to sell that to someone who can't afford a more expensive one. It'd be like selling a torn shirt with the elbows missing to a homeless person. It may be that a person can't easily afford it, but saying that running a subpar thing is a good excuse for that is, in my opinion, not a real benefit to the operating system.
These same devices, to be able to get the same capabilities into people's hand at an affordable price. Everybody deserves to have the same experiences.
David, how do you compete with Apple's hardware software services integration advantage? You may begin your 2-minute response.
Sure. Could you repeat the last part of the question? Did you say Apple software and hardware or just hardware?
Just hardware. I said hardware, software,
Gotcha.
Hardware, software services.
Oh, no problem. So it's a good question. I would say two things to that. So the first is, for software, what the questioner might be referring to, and this is a definite advantage of Apple, is the integration of the apps across Apple devices. This is something I'm sure Matt could elaborate on, and he would be absolutely right, in that apps that you have on your iPhone show up on your Mac and vice versa. To an extent, you have the same capabilities as far as files. So all of the things that I have in my documents and downloads are on my PC, but I have them set so that they sync with OneDrive. So for OneDrive, that means I can access those not only on an Apple device like my iPhone, but also on a Mac or an Android device, and I can pull those things up anywhere. And that's true for my Office apps. For example, if I open Word on my iPhone, it lets me know where I was as far as the recently opened documents, and I can get to them on both devices. As far as the hardware, one of the benefits of Windows is that, and this sounds like a replay of the Android argument, there are lots of different vendors produce Windows devices on a variety of price points.
Step off, Matt. This one is mine. Anyway.
Okay,
I was just going to say, I really like David. He's agreeing with me more than he thinks.
But yeah, that you're talking about. You can access you made my point for me though, David. You said that you can access your your stuff on a Mac as well as a PC. Well, Microsoft doesn't make it friendly enough for us to access our pages and Keynote our device our documents on a PC. As for the hardware point, I mean, Apple has been over the last few years coming back with different price points to compete with, for lack of a better term, the different Windows vendors that are making products cheaper. But the old saying goes is you get what you pay for. And everybody on this call knows what I'm about to say is true. A lot of people go out and buy a Mac just to put Windows on it. So Apple must be doing something right if people are buying Macs just to put their software on Apple's hardware.
Or is it that Windows is doing something right? Why would you go and basically, you used the word switch earlier. Are you really switching if you're putting the competitor's product on your product? It's not meant to be that way. Apple doesn't want you doing that.
They don't, but it happens.
But you shouldn't be doing that. If you have made a decision, I'm not going to put iOS on my Android no matter how much you pay me.
I don't think that's possible anyway, is it?
So no, it's not. But even if it were, like if I have clearly decided, and I'm not putting Mac OS on my Windows machines. There's no one fighting to do that, but I don't understand the people that make the strong argument for Mac OS, and then the first thing they do is go put JAWS and Windows and JAWS on their computer.
Well, I could defend Cliff by saying that maybe those people want two operating systems on the same machine instead of one.
It is probably that's the case, but you'll never catch me doing that. I know people that I work with that do it. To me, putting Windows on a Mac is like mixing oil and water. It just don't go. I agree with Kevin when it comes to that. You cannot pay me to put Windows on my Mac. I can't do it. If they said jump off this bridge and put Windows, well, maybe not then, but you just can't pay me to put my Windows on my Mac. I'm not doing it.
Okay, so if I write you out $1 million check for you to do it, you're not going to do it. Then is that what you're
David,
saying?
call me after this call.
Is that what you're saying? I just
admit it in public.
Right, exactly. I wouldn't.
15 seconds.
So, no, I would not admit that in public. But that is, that is a good point. That says, because no Android is going to have iOS and no Windows is going to have Mac on it. So,
Matthew, many say you can't truly multitask on an iPad like a traditional computer. What's your defense?
So when the iPad was first created, it was designed to allow for a full screen app experience that would be very, very simple. Apple really didn't know where the product was going to go. And what has happened is that the product has been so successful, people love it so much that they've wanted to do more and more on their products. Look, let's remember, folks, it wasn't Apple begging people to be productive with their iPads. Apple never said this has to be the best multitasking device you've ever had. It's the consumers who've said that because they like the iPad so much. And so Apple has responded by consistently increasing the ability, the functionality with multitasking like never before now in iPad OS 26. They've made it very, very clear that you can still use a single view full screen app if you want, but you can also now have 2, 4, even 8 apps on your iPad with an external monitor. You can have tiled windows. You can multitask in a variety of different ways, picture in picture. You can even do background 4K or 8K video rendering now with Final Cut Pro. So I think Apple is addressing it, but I think the most important point, since I have time yet, is just to go back and say that so many ways everybody agrees with it, which is that the reason people want to multitask on the iPad is because they like it so much. I have never heard a Windows user or an Android user say, boy, I really wish this thing, whatever it may be, because they want the iPad to do everything because it's the best device for doing everything. That would be my contention.
Well, one reason that us Windows and Android people don't have to say that is because it already does it. I can already multitask on my Android, whether it's a phone or a tablet. I can already multitask on my Windows machine.
Well, maybe, but can you do it well? because the Windows machines that I've seen, really struggle to run one app, let alone multitask. And I can't really speak to Android on that regard, but I can tell you this: I've not seen high-end audio editors. Apple includes what should probably be about a $400 audio editor and about a $400 video editor with the iPad at no cost. You got to really search to find those for Windows or especially Android. I've actually done searches to try to find equivalents to GarageBand for Android, and the general consensus in the group is there are audio editing apps and what have you, but they just don't come close.
Matt, I'm a little confused when you say you've never seen a Windows machine even able to run one app well. I don't even have the fastest laptop on the block, but I could have a Reaper window open with Outlook, and several other windows open, Slack, and I have no problem running those apps. This is on 16 gigs of RAM, and don't have any slowdowns in performance. I'm running an 11th gen i7 chip. So I'm not sure.
I don't know if I have time to respond to that, other than just really to say that I will admit that Windows has made some tremendous strides in the past. There's a lot of stuff that Windows did very poorly back in the day that they have improved upon, absolutely. And I don't think they had a choice because they didn't have anywhere to go but up. But on the other hand, what I see is I see a lot of this sort of, okay, I gotta wait. My computer's being slow. Okay, this is taking time. Okay, I see a lot of Windows users, and so I might be speaking slightly hyperbolically by maybe about 1.5%, but I don't experience those kinds of things on my Apple devices. I mean, they just work.
What do you say to those who argue Mac OS is too restrictive for power users compared to Windows? You may begin your 2-minute response now.
This is the PG show, right? That's absolutely ridiculous because, we have apps that work on the Mac as well as the iPad that are high-powered devices or apps. Logic Pro, Final Cut Pro, GarageBand, Audio Hijack, Amadeus Pro. I mean, I could go all night. There's another one called Matt? Give me the name of that app. It's like the big brother to Logic, but it costs like $400 more. What is that app called that people buy? I cannot remember the name of that app, but it's Mac is very. Number one, our hardware starts at 16 gigs of RAM and 512. I think Windows does now, but before they were starting at 8 and 4, which, as most of you know, JAWS can't even run on that small amount of RAM anymore. But Macs, you can multitask. You can have 8, 9, 10, sometimes 12 windows open, doing multiple things, streaming, editing audio, listening to music, checking email on the web, doing all this other stuff. So for anybody that says that particular statement, either one, didn't give Mac enough time, or two, didn't have the patience to figure out what their Mac could really do before they took it back to the store or before they got it from that desk and decided that wasn't the device for them anymore. Because Mac has come, trust me, when it first came out with VoiceOver back in 2007, 2008, all the way to 2000, where we are now, it wasn't the machine it is now. There was some accessibility hiccups and hurdles, but now we're at the point where, like I said, more with the Mac, because I believe you can do more with your Mac than a PC.
Wonder if the questioner might have been referring to being able to, and I'm not even saying I agree with it because I wouldn't argue this point myself, was he or she maybe asking about being able to tweak systems? I know you can tweak system settings, but
oh yeah,
compared to Windows, would you say it's comparable?
I'd say you can tweak even more settings because we're able to go into terminal. We have more flexibility as it relates to accessibility in our recovery partition, where we can make tweaks and adjustments before the system even starts up to make sure the system runs the way that we want to, or make the adjustments that we want to on the fly. I mean, like I said, there's terminal and there's Xcode where we can develop apps on our computers and things of that nature. So.
But how easy is that for the person who you and maybe Matt or y'all are the only people that are going to be doing that? With Windows, you pick it up and you make one or two changes in JAWS, and that's it. That's all you need to do. How easy is it for someone who doesn't care about all that? Everybody's not a tech instructor.
Well, you are, but anyway, you can make those adjustments in VoiceOver too. I mean, it's more than 1 and 2, and we have a lot of things that we can do on the fly. Verbosity, voices, tone, speed, whatever the case may be. Of course, like I mentioned, terminal, where you can type in a code and you can have your computer restart and install a different OS. And like you said, the average person is not going to do that, but those adjustments can be done with no sighted help as it relates to accessibility. I'm not saying that's not possible on Windows because I've never delved into that side of it, David, but I'm just saying that it is possible to do on a Mac.
How do you respond to claims that Windows is prone to bloat and instability? Your 2-minute time begins now.
Okay, really those are two different questions. I'll try to address both of those. So first we'll talk about bloat, meaning does it come with a lot of junk that you don't want that could be removed in order to save space or resources if the quote-unquote junk is running? And the answer, and I will concede this, is yes, in parentheses, depending on the vendor of the PC. And it is true that some PC vendors do include additional software, which may or may not be useful because they get money from those third-party suppliers to do it. I've seen it happen, but that software can be easily removed without having a lot of tech knowledge. I would say even with a little bit of knowledge, you can remove it if you know how to remove software in Windows. So I'll concede that that can be the case. Windows by itself, vanilla Windows, typically doesn't. Microsoft might include links to certain games and other things that you don't want, but again, you can remove those. So that's the issue with bloat. Now, instability is a different matter, and I would say in general, no. Now, if we were having this discussion during the Windows 95 days or the Windows 98 days, I would have to concede, yes, there was a lot of instability in Windows back then, in the 9X days. You couldn't keep your PC on for more than a day without having to reboot it. I'll be the first to say that. But I would say starting with XP all the way up to Windows 11, the answer is no. It's quite stable. My PC keeps on humming.
I will say that I have a Samsung as my daily driver, and it came with no bloatware. I don't have any extra games. I don't have any extra. I didn't have to remove anything, and I can leave this thing going for weeks at a time, and I never touch it and it's unresponsive. I never touch it and have to reboot before I can use it. Like it's very stable.
I'm liking Dave Goldfield more and more. I mean, it's so hard to disagree with you because you're being so nice to me. The only thing I would say is, there was a man many years ago named Alan Kay who said that people who are really serious about software should make their own hardware. I think Apple got it right. I think if I'm being perfectly blunt, and I say this out of nothing but love, I think Apple got it right, Microsoft and Google got it wrong, and they've had to claw their way back from their decision and stand firm by it, because if you don't, you look like pretty foolish. And they've been able to do that to some degree. I will agree with both Kevin and Dave that the modern Windows and Android have drastically improved over what we had many years ago. But as long as you have that constant dissonance between hardware and software where I've got to keep up with you and you've got to keep up with me, you're always going to be more prone than the experience that is completely controlled from top to bottom and on every side, which is where Apple is the only company that can say that to that extent.
Yes, and that's a fair and valid point that I have to concede. There's a blessing and a curse to the way Microsoft is doing things, and I guess you could argue the same is true for Google, because on the one hand, you run the risk of your hardware experiencing issues if you have, for example, driver incompatibility issues because Windows is having issues with your third-party sound card that's using an older set of drivers, right? The benefit, though, is that you do get hardware options with a variety of price points. So if I don't have a lot of money, I could find a new Windows PC for $400, maybe even less, and get that. And the chances are good that it will work without incident.
But it seems to me that the arguments that you and Cliff are making, it seems like Apple's been doing more of the catch up, and now y'all are able to say, we have this now, we have this now, we have this now, whereas we've already had it.
Kevin, how do you convince skeptics that Android's open app ecosystem is an advantage, not a risk? You may begin your 2-minute response.
So Android's openness is an advantage because of the customability of the app, customizability of you can customize whatever you want. However, don't get it confused. The Google's version of Android that is on Pixels, what is on Samsung's is not open. There's a version of Android that is released that anybody can take. That's what everybody takes and makes their own. But the Google version, thanks to all these people who made claims about an operating system that they know nothing about, has been locked down. So Android on Google devices and Android on Samsung, Android on ZTE or whatever manufacturer you want to go with is very secure. It is not open. So that's just, I think it's more of an advantage that you can customize. It is still open in the fact that they don't control your experience. You have a lot of control over your own experiences, but that is still very secure. They're even limiting the ability to side load and some of the things that we used to love about Android because of all the people who use Apple devices that have never used an Android device that make complaints about stuff they don't know anything about, but they went ahead and closed it up.
Well, I think that at the end of the day, though some people may not believe it, I can admit that I don't know everything. And so I don't know if Cliff's ready to admit that yet, but because I don't know everything, I really want a device that is just going to be there for me, that is just going to work, that isn't going to betray me because I decided to try to quote unquote customize something when I really have no idea what I'm doing, and the next thing I find myself in is a very poor experience. It's why I left Windows. It's why I left WordPress as a web designer platform, because sure, it's got probably thousands of choices that I may never see from my current web host, but several of those choices in my experience, actually rendered my website temporarily non-functional. Literally, you couldn't visit it. And that kind of thing, and I'm not saying that happens with Android every day. You're not going to, change your background and crash your device. But this, again, we go back to why impose a risk upon a group of people who know less than you about the technology under the guise of saying we want to give them choice. Some choices in life we really don't need to have. And the ones that we do, I trust the folks at Apple who have a little bit more knowledge about engineering and app development than I do to tell me what it is reasonable for me to choose or not. And I also trust them to listen to me, that if I really, really need something, that they're going to take that feedback, which they do quite well, and they're going to implement that into a future version. So going back to your previous comments, my friend, that they're always playing catch up, I wouldn't call it that. I'd say they're not always the first to the party, but when they release it, they're the best.
And I disagree with that wholeheartedly. First of all, Google, when they put if it's on a Pixel or if it's on Samsung, anything that you can customize, they make sure that it works with TalkBack. Most of the people who would customize would never get themselves in a pickle or in a situation to where there's no point of return. There's always a point of return. You can do a hard reset and you can start over. But there's never been anybody that I know of, any of the students that I've taught or anything, that's gotten themselves into something or experimented with something and completely bricked their phone or rendered it unusable or anything like that. So I don't know how they do it, because there's thousands and thousands of possibilities on Android, but they make sure that every one of them works.
How does iPad's voiceover redefine accessibility in a tablet-first world? Your 2-minute response begins now.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say with a fair degree of certainty, though I don't want to be too dogmatic because Kevin might know something that would prove me wrong. But to my knowledge, I'd really like to say that the iPad was the first tablet to natively have a fully functional screen reader that you could actually use, including in third-party apps and so on. There's never been an iPad made that won't come out of the box talking if you want it to, able to be fully accessible right from the ground up with setup and recovery and everything else. And as far as how it redefines the experience, I don't even, to this day, it amazes me, because when I first heard about VoiceOver on the iPhone and iPod Touch back in 2009, I saw the announcement. I pictured in my mind wandering around aimlessly on a touchscreen, constantly choosing the wrong thing, because how does a blind person use a touchscreen? I can't even begin to express the brilliance that Apple engineers had to create VoiceOver for a tablet first or a touch first environment. And we know that the other operating systems, including Microsoft Surface tablets, including Android, they all kind of followed it. Everybody uses the same basic premise now: tap, swipe, double tap. It took Android a while to get a rotor, but they eventually got it. That's okay. That's all right. We'll let that go. They got it eventually. But there's an incredible amount of brilliance in the engineering that went into making this screen reader, and it works so well. No matter what apps that you throw at it, again, you'll find your inaccessible one if the developer doesn't know anything about it. But Apple has really taken great steps to provide
15
developers
seconds.
with all the tools that they need to make their apps and their websites accessible, and even things that normally require special gestures for sighted folks, dragging and all these other things. They've got ways to do it in VoiceOver.
Okay, so I'm one of those people. This is Kevin. I'm one of those people who doesn't believe that the rotor is the be all end all in the first place. And let's not forget, it took Apple a while to get it too. It didn't launch with the rotor. I touched the very first iPhone at the ACB convention in Orlando, Florida, before anybody knew that VoiceOver was coming, and it did not have a rotor. But yes, the very first tablet, because the very first Android phone came with TalkBack. Was it where it is today? No, but it came out talking. That's one. It took iPhone to what, 3S? The G1 could talk, and you swiped and you double tapped. There were some other screen readers that came along the way, like mobile accessibility, that tried to simplify the experience and kind of put it more like in a controlled environment, like JAWS and some of the other screen readers for Windows. But eventually, TalkBack came back maybe 1 or 2 years later, 3 years later, and rendered those apps unusable, or not the choice that people would want to use. So TalkBack does just as much, if not more. I can use There's gestures that are built in. There's the old right angle gestures that some people love, still live and love today. There's multi-finger gestures. There's image descriptions. There's screens descriptions. There's all kinds of things that they've added all along the way. Many of the things they've had all along, but nobody ever knew because, see, I actually know both. I don't know iPhone like a power user, but I can speak from experience. Like I know what I don't have because I don't have an iPhone, and that's nothing. I don't have.
Well, I would say you'd have to use it more extensively to be able to say that, but that's a separate story. I think two things. I don't doubt your experience at the convention where you saw voiceover, but I suspect you saw something pre-release because I had the very first version of the iPhone to have voiceover with the very first public release of the software, and it absolutely did have a rotor. In fact, they had a rotor on Mac OS before they had it on iPhone OS. It just wasn't done with gestures. It was done with keyboard commands. That was all the way back in
15 seconds.
2009. And as far as the the Android point, I don't know anything to say about that other than all I can say is that it's a brilliant design that they've come up with to make this a touch-first environment.
Cliff, what are the advantages of VoiceOver for Mac compared to JAWS for Windows?
Nothing.
2 minutes.
Absolutely nothing. They're as different as night and day, and that's the mistake that people make when they come from Windows to the Mac. They're expecting VoiceOver to do the same thing that JAWS does, and going over to JAWS and expecting JAWS to do the same thing that VoiceOver does. Windows and Mac, VoiceOver and JAWS, NVDA or narrator, whatever screen reader you're using on Windows, they are not. There's no similarities in them. Now, Apple has along the way, how can I say this, held people's hand, babied them, however you want to put it, and put some JAWS type gestures or features in VoiceOver. And if you listen to my first episode of More with the Mac and the Pilot, you know what I'm about to say. Like that pesky caps lock key that they use for the VoiceOver modifier. That was on JAWS first. You will never, ever catch me using voice or caps lock on my Mac for a VoiceOver modifier. That's too JAWS-ish, Windows-ish. I'm not gonna do it. I will give up QuickNav before I give up before I use QuickNav or use the VoiceOver modifier as a caps lock key. It's not gonna happen. And then along the lines of single letter navigation or quick key navigation as they call it on Safari, where you can do H for heading, L for link, B for button, X for checkbox, C for combo box, R for radio button. That was first implemented on Windows. I'll give them credit for that. But Apple saw that people needed a faster way to navigate the web, saw that it was sufficient, so they implemented it into VoiceOver. So my answer to that question is there's absolutely nothing the same about JAWS and VoiceOver except a few minor gestures and key commands that Apple has implemented to make Windows users feel more comfortable.
Well, once in a while, I got to jump in and help you out, Cliff, like the brother I never wanted. Never had. I actually do think there are advantages to VoiceOver. For one thing, you get to access the whole screen. You see that there's a toolbar. So when you go to your sighted counterparts and they say to you, well, that icon is the blue button in the upper right hand corner of the screen. A Windows user, it's like, okay, well, that was JAWS key plus F7 to get to that, or that was, but on the Mac, it's like, okay, yeah, I know exactly where that is, or especially on the iPad, the one I'm representing here, yeah, absolutely. I can communicate with my sighted counterparts so easily. They say, how do you know that? Well, because Apple doesn't try to tell me what I need to access on the screen. It lets me access the whole thing with VoiceOver, and I believe part of that, again, goes back to the fact it's built by the same people who made the operating system.
Well, I misunderstood the question. I thought they were asking what were the similarities. But yes, you're absolutely right. That is an advantage of VoiceOver over JAWS, because the one thing that you didn't say that Apple said that I heard Steve Jobs say is he wants blind users to have the same experience that sighted users have. And that's why that iOS and the Mac OS is designed the way that it is.
This is David. I think I would have to respectfully disagree with Matt. I would argue that NVDA and JAWS offers a facility to actually several, and if you're using a touchscreen device, where with JAWS or NVDA, I absolutely can know where everything is located on the screen. If I'm using a touchscreen device, they offer touchscreen support using very similar as Cliff had I think Cliff had already no Matt had said, very similar gestures. But also, even if I don't have a touchscreen device, I can use the touch cursor on JAWS to be able to review everything on the screen. And I can also use the object navigation with NVDA to see everything on the screen, and not just to review it, but to be able to activate it. I would also argue that I don't think that Apple implementing certain JAWS features is babying the user. I think it helps users actually that are making that transition, in the same way that if I were writing a word processor and said, what key should I use for the spell checker? I would probably choose F7. I'm not trying to baby Microsoft Word users, but I am trying to consider them if I want to allow them to make a successful transition and still try to find features that are unique, which Windows screen readers have done.
I think the issue, Dave, comes in with not so much that you can't do those things like with the touch cursor, but rather that it's sort of natively a Windows key navigation, Windows commands, whereas with Mac, it's natively voiceover, so it just sort of flows. But our time is up. I still like you, even though you disagreed with me. Just like
Kevin, what makes TalkBack on Android stand out in the mobile accessibility landscape? Your 2-minute response begins now.
To me, I guess the things that make it stand out now is that it is powered by Gemini. The addition of image descriptions right in the operating system at the same time, basically that PictureSmart came to JAWS, has just been invaluable. The way that it can describe screens, the details that it gives me for pictures right there in the app. I don't have to take it into Be My Eyes or even Google's Lookout or anything. I can just tap, like I have mine set to tap once with 4 fingers, and it just gives me detailed description, and I can ask more detailed questions. There's a Gemini button right there, and then I can take that information and put it in my alt text or whatever. But that's one of the things that makes it stand out to me. I don't know a lot about the extra features that are on the other OS, but that's one of the things that will keep me right here, because they keep adding, they didn't leave us out when they brought Gemini and all that to the OS, and they started working on the AI features. They made sure that blind people were blessed along the way, even though they have a lot of those same features in Lookout, which is basically Google's version of Seeing AI or whatever app you choose. But they made sure that it was a part of TalkBack.
15 seconds.
Adding features. They just keep adding better features. Another thing that makes it stand out that I really, really like is the table navigation that they just added. That's one of my favorite features that they add. So now I can see a table the way that it's laid out.
No, I think that the features that you talk about, which are also available to iOS and iPadOS users, are absolutely awesome. And the way we can get images described, and the way we can get text read to us from for the first time in history, to be able to say, well, that is an image-based PDF, but I can actually read it without any third-party apps whatsoever. I can read it with the built-in screen recognition, the built-in image descriptions, what have you, because now OCR is actually a part of my operating system. So it's a wonderful thing. Absolutely.
So, and another thing I would emphasize, by the way, that dog barking was me taking my frustrations out on Matt and Cliff. The thing that I would...
Please feed him, okay?
Yes. I would emphasize also that a lot of people, and by the way, I'm an iPhone user. I am not anti-rotor. I love the rotor. I use it all the time. But I have noticed that that is a real pain point with students that I have had in the past while training them how to use iOS. And Android has similar options to jump through different items like the rotor without that two-finger twist. Now, I know that as an iOS apologist as well, I could counter that by saying, well, you could assign other gestures for the rotor for students who are experiencing those pain points. And you can, and you should, if you are experiencing that. But it is nice that out of the box, Android does offer a way to jump through different settings without having to do that two-finger thing, which for some of us is very easy, but for other people can be a little tricky to master.
Yeah, that's the three-finger swipe to the left or the right.
Yep.
Or some people like Cliff like to swipe up and down.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, Google put it in there for an option, so I use it. For those of you who don't know, I also own a Pixel 10 Pro, so that's why he said that.
David, Windows is really, for all intents purposes, the only one of our represented platforms that can benefit from having a third-party screen reader rather than using the pre-installed narrator screen reader. Can you discuss this briefly from a standpoint of advantages or disadvantages? Your 2-minute response begins.
Well, the first thing I'll say that might surprise some people is I'm going to sort of step my foot into Kevin's camp here and say that actually there is at least one other third-party screen reader for Android, that being G-Show or Commentary Screen Reader or what have you. That's a nice alternative. As far as, I guess I'm not sure of the question. You mean the advantages of having a third-party screen reader? I guess if I'm interpreting that correctly?
Advantages or disadvantages?
Okay, well, I don't know of any disadvantages. I don't know of a disadvantage when it comes to choice. So if you give users more choice, there's no disadvantage to me. As far as advantages, different screen readers have different ways of doing things. Now, there is a lot of similarity and uniformity in many of the commands. For example, the ones that either Cliff or Matt brought up earlier, where you can do R for radio button and E for edit. JAWS was the one who came up with the single key navigation, and NVDA followed/borrowed those commands, however you want to say that. But there are also differences in the way that they work. The other advantage that I mentioned in my opening statement is the scripting. So if I am using Narrator and there's an app that isn't accessible to me, that Narrator isn't reading, there's not a lot I can do. But for JAWS and NVDA, there's a lot you can do to customize that, to try to make apps more accessible and in some ways extremely accessible.
So I think one of the biggest issues with regards to the ability to have, or maybe in some cases the need to have, a third-party screen reader on these platforms, my colleagues here who are doing an excellent job, and I really appreciate you guys, earlier, got on me about the cost of an iPad versus a basic Android tablet or a basic Windows machine. What about the cost of JAWS? I mean, can we talk about that for a second in a very real way and not pretend like it's not a huge extra payment to somebody who can barely afford the computer in the first place? And that is, in my mind, just inexcusable. I don't understand why a person who may not even have a job because they can't see has to wait for a government agency or pay a significant amount of money when, and I appreciate that Narrator's there because, yeah, you could get by using Narrator. But I think that's just the point of this whole thing. VoiceOver built in and because the accessibility is a right, because we really do deserve a level playing field, Apple has said, we're going to just do this for you. If you have a problem with it, you contact Apple Accessibility. And, they really do take feedback seriously. And I'm not saying that Google doesn't or that Microsoft doesn't, okay? It's not that. I'm sure that they do. But I just know with Apple, I mean, I've been a beta tester now for several years. I'm not sure I've ever reported one bug that hasn't eventually gotten fixed or gotten addressed. So I give a lot of props to Apple for that.
But the advantages of the third-party screen reader when you are in a place of employment, the scriptability, the scripting that David is talking about has made it possible for me to be employed in competitive employment in environments where if you were in the proprietary software that they used, I would not be able to work. Like, it would not talk. It would not say a word. That's something that can't be fixed by making a call to the accessibility help desk at Apple. That's not something that could be helped by calling the accessibility help at Microsoft. But the fact that the person was able to come in and script it and make that thing sing like a bird was amazing. And it made it to where I was able to be employed. You can't take away that, like, there's no compromising that.
Yes, and another thing that I think a lot of people forget. I deserve an extra 5 seconds for that. No, a lot of people forget that NVDA, which I will say is free, that doesn't cost anybody anything, that you can install on as many machines as you want, that can also be scripted. And I think a lot of people forget that. They kind of think of JAWS and scripting, but NVDA can also have add-ons. And so someone who's in the position that you described, Matt, and you bring up a valid point, I'm not going to argue with that, could try NVDA.
Windows is vast and versatile, but it can sometimes face challenges with security and performance. How does the latest version address these? You may begin your 2-minute response now.
Sure. So security and performance, again, kind of two parts or two different issues in one question, but that's all right. We can talk about both. As far as security, you do have built-in security in Windows called Windows Security. It's gone through a few different name changes, and I will also concede that when it first came out, back in the early days of Windows Defender, it might not have had as good of a track record. But now it's to the point where, although it may lack a lot of the features of a good antivirus program, it by itself is a good antivirus program. And also Windows 11, since you asked, where do we stand right now with the latest version, you have to have certain requirements in place in order for Windows 11 to successfully run. And that isn't just because Microsoft is trying to force people to buy newer machines. It's because those newer machines offer really robust security. So I would say in security, Windows is in a good place. As far as performance, we briefly touched on this earlier. I honestly don't have any performance issues with Windows. I don't work for Microsoft. They're not paying me to come to this debate, and they're not paying me to say what I just said. But I honestly don't have an issue with performance. If someone says, well, goody for you, I'm having crashes and issues right and left, I would say that's not necessarily the fault of Windows. You might want to look on your PC to make sure you don't have any malware or other things that could be impeding that.
I do agree, and I do admit that Microsoft has come a long, long way. There's no question that Windows Defender, whatever you want to call it now, if you get a computer with an SSD, you don't have to do disk defragmentation. You don't have all of those things you had years ago. I like and I saw what you're talking about with Windows 11, the new requirements that they, only will run on certain machines and so forth. And I think they're making tremendous strides in that regard. Where the the closed ecosystem, the walled garden that so many people criticize Apple for, or say in a sometimes a joking way, but still, in a sort of a critical way. When I wall my garden, I'm probably not going to get the same rodents and the same insects in there as if I didn't. So I mean, it's a choice. At the end of the day, it's absolutely a choice. I like the walled garden approach, and I would think if I were deploying systems to people, to businesses, to entities, I would think if I do that, and I would think if I were making or inventing an operating system, a platform, a piece of hardware, I'd want to wall the garden because I'd want my name to remain clean and say this person's product is not tainted, even though it probably wasn't my fault, if they did something that caused a problem. But if I didn't allow them to do it in the first place, then we have nobody to blame.
Right. The only thing I would add, not even in disagreement, but just as an afterthought, is I've been using Windows for a little over 30 years. And in that time, I have only been majorly hit by a computer virus twice. The first time was in 1999, and I totally admit that was completely my fault, and it could have been prevented, and it was my own arrogance and stupidity that allowed for that. The second time was, I think, around 2015, and I had done nothing to cause or exacerbate this, and to this day, I'm not quite sure where it came from. I took some serious precautions after that, and I haven't been plagued with it since. So yeah, I would say overall Windows is an incredibly secure operating system. I do use a third-party security suite in addition to the built-in security.
Cliff, Mac hardware is often praised for its quality, but there is no question that it is significantly more costly. Looking at recent online options, I can purchase a new Lenovo IdeaPad for under $500. While the current starting price of Apple's least expensive MacBook is over $1,000. How do you justify the cost difference against many Windows PCs?
Well, the first part of that I'll answer is you get what you pay for. For instance, my sister just recycled her 2009 MacBook, which means it survived over 15 years with not having to replace anything except the battery. The other part of that is that second part's not true. You can go get a MacBook Air from Best Buy right now for $799, and that's not low end. I mean, we're talking 16 gigs of RAM, 512 hard drive, SSD, with pages, numbers, and Keynote built in, the iWork suite that Apple gives away for free, and Microsoft makes you pay a subscription for 365 or for Office or Business Professional suite to have on your computer for over $300. So, again, I think it comes down to, do you want to replace your Windows machine every 3 or 4 years, or do you want a MacBook or an iMac or a Mac Studio that is going to last for 8, 9, maybe even 10 years. So, and as we alluded to before, if Apple's hardware wasn't so good, a lot of Windows users wouldn't go out and buy a Mac just to put Windows on it so it would last.
Well, I think the first thing that's wrong with that argument is that you get what you pay for is not true. It's a nice saying, yay, but it's not true. The fact is that prices have come down. If you can get a computer that has the Core i15 or whatever it is now, operating, chip in it, and you can get 16 gigs of RAM and it's $500, that's not getting what you pay for. That's just what the prices are giving right now. And you can get that and a JAWS home license for $99 and still come in cheaper than your $799 MacBook Air and have much more capabilities on the screen reader side than you have on the voiceover side. More importantly, Pages and all those things are free because nobody is using them, not even Mac users. Office costs because that's what people want.
I am going to jump over my side of the fence briefly, and as shocking as this may sound, while I do agree that the benefit of multiple vendors with multiple price points for me and for lots of people is a definite advantage, I've got to kind of agree with Cliff on one area, and that is that Mac hardware is beautiful. It's really well made, and when you touch it, you can tell this is not a piece of junk. I'm not at all implying, by the way, that every Windows laptop is a piece of junk, because that is not the case at all.
You want me to imply it just for fun?
But I will say that Mac hardware is quite good.
As for the JAWS being better than VoiceOver, that's a debate that we're going to have until we both don't work for Chris Cole anymore. So we won't go there. But anyways, as the other point is, I mean, $7.99, and you're getting much more with the lower, but I'm also getting a built-in screen reader. And again, it just depends on who you ask.
I'm getting one too.
Yeah, he's getting one too.
Yeah, but you have to pay. But you have to pay a third-party vendor for it.
No, not if he's using Narrator.
Well, that's true.
Or NVDA, actually.
Or NVDA.
David, did nobody ask you to step into the ring?
I can have 3 screen readers.
I'm just joking, David.
I think you asked him to.
Go ahead and finish, Kevin.
I said I could get 3 screen readers, and you know, most of the people who live in Texas don't pay for their JAWS anyway. They open their case for 20 minutes just so they can get JAWS. So
well, everybody doesn't live in Texas, but you're right.
Well, I'll tell you guys all the solution. It's the iPad, because I can pay the $400, and I would put that up against that $400 laptop any day. And by the way, my friend, I don't care whether people use Pages, Numbers, and Keynote or not. They are absolutely more capable than their Microsoft equivalents.
Oh, they're not. But that's why they're free. Nobody wants them.
Oh, man.
Back to your corners, everybody.
For many years now, Siri has been perceived as lagging behind other personal assistants. There's no question that it lacks in the artificial intelligence department, seeing as Android devices, for example, have Gemini built in. In your mind, how can this be reconciled with Apple's perceived advantages, and how does Siri compare to competitors like Gemini and others in terms of functionality and seamless integration within the Apple ecosystem, especially for productivity?
Apple is a master class in how to build products that actually work, that people actually want to use. They may not be a master class in being the first to release something, or the quickest to release it, or the fastest to get it on the most devices and make the most money, but they've got the masterclass in how to release something that's going to long-term be successful. Apple has taken their time with this AI thing. There's no question about it, and we're about to see, I believe, a major evolution of Siri in the coming months that I have the confidence to say, come back in a year, and Siri will be the gold standard by which every AI assistant is measured. But I will say this. Apple knows when they have some work to do in an area. That's why we have ChatGPT integration with Siri. That's why we have the feature directly integrated so that we can simply use SIRI and we can talk to ChatGPT and get any answer we want. That's why we're seeing these evolutions. But Apple is more interested about making something that isn't going to suffer from security breaches, from privacy issues, from glitches here and there, and instead, even if it takes longer, and even if it sometimes means that their reputation temporarily has to suffer, when they release it, it is spot on. And we've been able to prove that for decades now, going all the way back to copy and paste, when people criticized Apple for not being the first to bring copy and paste to their systems. All along the way, their goal, and the reason that some of these features were delayed is because they didn't meet Apple's high standards. Apple could have released them and said, okay, it's version 1.0, deal with it, but they chose the high road.
Well, Apple set This is Kevin. Apple set those limits when they made those wild claims at WWDC or whatever. I mean, they were out there singing and dancing and showing all this stuff. Apple Intelligence was going to be the be all, end all. And now we're at a stall. So they set the standard. They're the ones that put it out there and they couldn't deliver. Face it, they couldn't deliver. That is a fact. They did not deliver. If Siri is anything next year, and I know a lot of iOS users who've never liked Siri from the beginning, so I don't know what Siri you're using, but um, if Siri is anything by this time next year, it'll be because it's powered by Gemini, which is probably going to be the case. Just like they went with Google Search, they always go with what they know is good.
But I think that's the whole point, though, to be able to to be able to hitch yourself to a wagon that is a company that will come out and say, yeah, look, we did tell you this was going to be ready, but instead of forcing you to use something that really isn't ready, we're going to admit that we need more time with it. And we're going to, instead of fighting hard and saying we won't use Gemini, if that really is what ends up happening, it's going to be because, yeah, we believe this is going to give our users the best experience. So in short, this is a company that is actually, in spite of what people say about the Apple tax and all that nonsense, this is actually a company that puts its users first. If they didn't, they could have released the new Siri in iOS 18.4, and we could have all hated it. But instead, they chose to take a step back and figure things out before making us use it.
Well, I enjoy it because eventually you're just going to be using an Android phone. I mean, hello, you got Gemini, you got Google Search, you got Samsung making most of the hardware and all that other stuff. So pretty soon you'll just be on an Android phone, still being just being an Apple loyalist, but you'll be carrying an Android phone.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is, Matt, you said, well, they don't want to release it and have people hate it. The problem is people hate it now. And if anything, I think the functionality has degraded. So, I of course, people could hate it if the AI is really bad, but we know that in many ways AI is not up to spec anyway. No matter which vendor they go with. It's a very difficult position that they're in.
Well, it is a difficult, and it's also, where one company is sort of taking a food court
15
approach.
seconds.
Don't get me wrong, I like food courts, but another company is saying we're going to hire high-end chefs in-house. Even if they come from other companies, we're dealing with privacy and security. So there you go. Thank you.
Kevin, Android's customization is a major selling point, but can it lead to perceived problems or frustrations compared to the controlled environments of iOS or macOS? Your 2-minute response begins now.
I would say no. Anything that you can customize, like I said, you can get out of. There will always be a way. They check and double check that you want to make that change. And so you can always get out of it. Whatever the customizations that you make, you can always reset them. And the things that people would really want, the average user would want to customize is something like, how does TalkBack say this? Or, what does my wallpaper look like? Like they have enough wallpapers, like thousands and thousands, and then you can customize them and you can use AI to design one. You can put yourself in different settings and things like that. So it's not anything that's going to like overhaul the operating system or make it unusable or anything like that. So no, the customizations that most people are going to make, I mean, you can get into developer options and stuff like that and change how Bluetooth works and enable some features that most people don't have access to. But that's what my phone is set to right now, developer options, and I always run the betas and all that. But I've never had a phone bricked or unusable or anything.
I don't have too much to say. I mean, I absolutely, changing wallpaper, these kinds of things are basic things you can do on, on Apple, Android. It doesn't matter. I think we all know what we're really talking about here. And you're right. They're probably not things that the average user is going to experience. But, I thought earlier and didn't get a chance to say it because I wanted to be respectful of the time, but, you and I might deal with different groups of people, Kevin, because you said, this user, that user that you deal with has never had such and such an issue or whatever. I work with a gamut of people, and many of them are extremely brilliant when it comes to technology. But I also work with others who they're equally brilliant, but they're terrified, and they're afraid to go in and do something as simple as change their sound effects because of the fact that they think they might mess up their device. They're not going to, but they're afraid that they might. And so I think that when the more we can control that environment, the bigger market we can speak to, because whether it is, as I said earlier, a 3-year-old child or a 93-year-old great grandma, they can use these Apple devices with confidence because everybody's Apple device is going to be the same. And then if they call me, I don't have to say, well, now are you using a Google Android? Are you using an LG? Are you using whatever? I just know how to use their Apple device regardless of what it is.
But sound settings are sound settings, wallpapers are wallpapers, accessibility is accessibility, like so forth and so on. There's no, Samsung does stuff a little bit different than Google, but sound is still sound. Their network is still Wi-Fi and NFC and all that other stuff. They might call it by slightly different names, but the minute that someone calls me on the phone or the minute that a student comes in that class, I don't care if they bring me a Asus, if they bring me a ZTE, if they bring me a Alcatel, whatever they bring me, when they hit that settings, I already know what to do. I've never had to learn a phone. I've never had to take 20 minutes and learn a phone. I've never had to say, wait a minute, go back. I automatically know what happens. Networks means networks. Bluetooth means Bluetooth. NFC means NFC. About means about. Security means security. Privacy means privacy. Keyboard and language means keyboard and language.
Well, of course it does, but I use that simply to illustrate a point that if we can minimize, there was a study a long time ago done by IBM where IBM said if you can come up with one unified platform for everybody, you're going to simplify your cost of ownership, and I think that still rings true to this day.
At this time, we'd like to move on to closing arguments, and our first remarks are going to be from Kevin.
Thanks everybody for having me. To anybody here that does use Android or Windows, I hope I represented well. I haven't heard anything here today that makes me even slightly more interested in the iPhone, iPad, or Mac. So I came out the victor here. That's all I came to do, to see if I could be convinced. I'm still proudly holding my Pixel 9 Pro in my hand right now, and you're not going anywhere, baby.
Thanks. I also would like to thank everyone for being here, and thank you for the invitation to do this. This was a blast. So I want to close by finishing off some of the things that I didn't have time for in the opening statement. I basically talked about how Windows allows for third-party screen readers. Those screen readers can be customized in very specific ways to make themselves compatible with apps. These screen readers have been out for 20 to 30 years, 30 in the case of JAWS. I believe that's also the case for Dolphin Supernova. So you're dealing with accessibility vendors that have been around for a while and understand the needs of blind people. It's compatible with lots and lots of different hardware. So whether you want a very high-end machine or whether you don't have a lot of money to spend, you can probably find a Windows machine that will work well for you and for your accessibility solutions. That one of the things I didn't mention is if you're into gaming, Windows might be a preferable platform for you. It's been well known to be a good gaming machine. Windows also offers touchscreen support, which you can't currently get on the Mac. Of course, you can on the iPad, but on the Mac, you can't. But on Windows, you can, and you have very similar commands that you do on other touchscreen operating systems, and screen readers have those commands and support that. I would also say that there are probably more trainers in the assistive technology space who train on Windows. Now, I want to be careful saying that because there are some really good and competent Apple trainers, and there are some really good and competent Apple trainers on this call. And so if you want a good and competent Apple trainer, I would definitely look up Cliff or Matt, and you will be quite satisfied. But I would say there are a huge amount of people in the blindness space that have been using Windows for decades. I'm one of them, who are able to provide really good training. So for me, for Windows, the bottom line is choice. And I think Windows is a good operating system that offers that choice. That's really it for my closing statement. I just really want to thank everybody for being available, and thank you to my, I don't even want to say opponents, because at the end of the day, we're all friends and we all are doing similar work, and we all want the same thing, which is for blind people to be able to accessibly use their technology regardless of what platform you use. And regardless of the platform you use, whether it's Windows or Apple or Google, you're going to find a lot of good solutions and options, and hopefully good trainers to help you with that if that's what you're looking for and if that's what you need.
So in my lifetime so far, I have met a few people like Kevin who have said they've always been an Android user, they'll always be an Android user. I've met some people who have said, I'm an Android user and now I'm going to give Apple a try. I'll tell you what I have never met in my life, not once, is a user who started using an Apple product and then left. I know one who left for an Android and came back to Apple. I've known several like that. I've never known any who have chosen to use Apple products and then completely reversed course and gone back to Android. But more than that, we've had a great debate tonight, great discussion, and some very, very worthy, as you say, opponents even is too strong. I agree with you. I think everyone's represented fantastically. And to be clear, I don't think any of these are bad products. I really don't. If your budget allows, get both an iPad and get a Mac. Use them both. And use Windows whenever you want a little fresh air in the house. I'm just kidding there, Dave. But my contention was at the beginning, and still is. Thank you, David. My contention was and is still that the iPad is the most versatile device that provides the most benefit to the most people with the best feature to price ratio. I mean, this is the device that my daughter uses when she's lying in bed to watch videos or to read a book. This is the device that I use 1 minute to watch a movie, 1 minute to surf the web, whether I'm at home or I'm outside somewhere or at the restaurant because I can use cellular data. But then the next minute, this is my desktop device with a keyboard with productivity features that allow me to do professional video editing, audio editing, web design, invoicing, presentations, basically whatever I need to do. This device excels at all of these things without compromising the others. I'm sure you can do all of those things with these other devices, but there always seems to be one thing or another that they excel at. But I can take this iPad, I can curl up with it like a good book, and I can interact directly with my content, or I can pull out the keyboard and I can use this device for high-end productivity tasks. I use it every day for everything that I do in my business and most things that I do in my personal life. And I've never found a device that I've liked more. There are a lot of Apple fanboys out there, Kevin. I'm sure you would say that. And it almost seems to you Android users like we're a cult or something. But let me remind you the reason we're Apple fanboys. Because we've tried the products and they've earned it. We are not being forced by Apple. Apple doesn't pay me a cent. In fact, I've spent a lot of money on Apple products. I'm sure my wife's face right now over here, sitting here, would confirm that for you. A lot of money on Apple products. They've not spent any on me, other than what they do for me as a business and for me being their customer. I've chosen their products because they give me an unparalleled experience, because the iPad gives me something that no other device can do, which is to be an equal player in everything that it does. And I could give you countless more examples, but that would just be redundant. The point is, if you're looking for a device that is going to go anywhere, do anything, and do it all equally well, it doesn't matter. I don't have to spend extra money if I want to video edit, if I want to record podcasts, if I want any of those things that I want to do. This device is truly the device like no other. I believe and I contend that the iPad is the perfect device for most people.
Of course, y'all saved the best for last. I agree with what David said. We all have the same goal. Accessibility and it working for you. And Kevin uses an Android and a PC. That works for him. I use a Mac and an iPad and an iPhone and a Pixel for work. That works for me. Matt uses an iPad and an iPhone. That works for him. David uses a PC and an iPhone. Now, all these combinations, the bottom line is they're all accessible. Does Microsoft dominate the corporate world? Of course they do. But one thing that wasn't mentioned is Apple dominates the education world. I bet you 4 out of every 5, or maybe it's a little bit more than that, maybe 3 out of 5 education districts, school districts use iPads for 3rd grade and up. I know my kids did. They also use Chromebooks, but Apple is more versed in the education system than most other companies. And that's where they have concentrated their efforts. And I applaud Microsoft and Freedom Scientific, the Sparrow, whatever their name is today, on what they've done so far. Because they've made it possible for people like Kevin to have a workplace that wasn't accessible. Somebody comes in the next day, writes a script, and he's off and flying. Or for David to be able to write his book on a PC and, do what he does in teaching accessibility. Matt, that doesn't like to brag too much, but he does. He wrote a book in Pages that's published on iBooks right now. So, Titanic, the greatest story ever told. Go get it on iBooks, audiobook, however you want to get it. It's a great story that he rewrote about the Titanic, did all his research. Matter of fact, I think we got a Zoom call coming up about it here in a couple of months that I usually host. So, but the bottom line is, accessibility works. Get what works for you. I use my Mac Studio at home because that's where I produce and edit my podcasts, record Zoom calls, host Zoom calls, do research, all that. When I'm outside, I use the iPad like Matt does. And one thing he didn't tell you is he's been using an iPad for somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 years, 100% of the time, for personal and business stuff. But so it's all about what works for you. We're not going to tell Kevin he can't use an Android. We're not going to tell Matt he can't use his iPad. I use a PC daily because I teach it. But Mac is my passion. When I get home, I don't touch the PC. When I'm at work, I teach it. I grew up on a PC. So, I mean, I'm no stranger to it. It's not like I'm bashing the PC, saying it's a bad device. No, I use it every day. I have to, number one, because I teach it. And number two, I actually enjoy teaching, learning new things that I didn't know from when I left before and went to the corporate world. So the bottom line is, I think all of us today, Kevin, David, Matt, me, all of us, we get, if we was in the same room, we'd probably go back and forth about my device can do this, your device can't do that. I bet you mine can do this and yours can't. I bet you mine does it better. But at the end of the day, we're making Matt pay for lunch. But no, but at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. An accessible device that works for us and for our families. And the other thing, Matt, that Jessica's probably still getting ready to divorce you for is as many times as you switch streaming services, because we know we can't count those on one hand. But anyway, I thank you guys for joining us. I thank everybody for the opportunity, Kevin, David, I'll tell you a little story about David. He seen my announcement. He's like, "Well, can I be on the next one?" I said, "Next one? You're on this one." So yeah, me and David, I actually got to meet him at a conference last summer, which was great. And I've met Matt and had his mom's cooking. So and me and Kevin worked together. So I know all these guys personally. So thank you for the opportunity. And again, like I said, at the end of the day, it's all about us having an accessible device that works for us.
He would have to bring up the streaming services, but just a second, because Cliff really said what we were going to say in closing in this whole thing for all of our audience, which is that we had to play a role here. And we designed this to be a debate because it was going to be fun. We had to really play that up. And that was the intention of it. But the reality of it is, and Dave Dina Terrace, the other Dave here, you and I have talked about this countless times when we've taught together, Dave. It doesn't matter what you use. You use what works for you. It
I don't
does
care
not.
what you use, just use something.
That's right. That's
Right?
exactly right. That's right. And so, hopefully what you've come away with, hopefully you've been blessed by the time together. You've had fun. We got some jabs in at each other. But at the end of the day, we still can be confident that I'm right. No, I'm just kidding. We still can be confident that whatever works for you is what you ought to use. There's no right or wrong.
What you guys never talked about, and maybe nobody asked the question, is Braille. And since it's, Louis' birthday this month, and there's been a lot of Braille talk and stuff like that, is using Windows and using Mac and using iPad, with a Braille display, Braille support, and also the deaf-blind community, because it's really important for these people. It's great for us who aren't, to have Braille. And I'm always have a Braille display if I can with me when I'm anything. But, what about Braille? And is there a difference between Windows, Mac, iPad, Android, with Braille support?
So, it's a little tricky for me to answer because I haven't done a lot with Apple products in Braille except for a little bit with iOS. So the only thing I can really speak of with some authority is Windows. And I think Windows, anybody who's used Windows with Braille, at least JAWS and NVDA, knows that they do really well with that. I think I've used JAWS a little more with Braille than NVDA, and I'm generally really satisfied with the experience. I've used iOS a little bit. I liked what I saw, but that was honestly a few years ago. I don't use Braille as often as you might think, although I read it really well. But I primarily am a speech user. But definitely with JAWS and NVDA, it works really well. And as a deaf-blind user or a Braille user, you're definitely safe with those options. Definitely JAWS.
I'd love to hear about Android. How about Android?
I've used Braille with the PC and iOS and the Mac. And it is supported very well on all three. Braille on PC, you need drivers for certain displays, like the Mantis is plug and play. The Emotion that came out about a year or so ago, it's pretty good. I think you got to have drivers. I'm not even going to talk about the Focus today. But anyway, the Mantis is plug and play on the Mac, and it works great with iOS. I mean, it's, you pair it and you're off and running with the Mantis and the Emotion. So
Android has Braille screen input, and now it's compatible with all Braille displays, and it has Braille over HID, which everybody was making a big deal about, but nobody was even using Braille. But anyway, so it works well. It works well with the e-reader that you get, both of the e-readers that you get from the NLS, and the Mantis and the Emotion, and all of them. And they pretty much just, lock in as soon as you just tell it to search for the Braille display, and it locks in. And they're always, every year, like at Google I/O this year, but they're always updating the tables and making it easier to use and adding other languages and making it easier to use. They have some blind people on staff, so
Excellent, excellent.
It doesn't work with multi-line displays though, Android yet. The dot pad, the Monarch, the Cadence I saw, but as far as I know, it doesn't work with that either. So it seems like with Braille, in my experience, Google's always been at the back of the line. I know that's the deal breaker why I use iOS than Google.
The one reason it probably doesn't work with the dock pad and other displays is sometimes a developer issue. It's not on Google's part. It's on. So there are people that when these manufacturers make their products, they automatically skew towards iOS, and people give Android the ding for it, but it's actually the manufacturer.
I think the real question is are the devices capable of it? And in my mind is the real question, and the answer is yes. So now it's just a matter of, again, if you've got a place you want to work and they really insist upon Windows or Mac or Linux, then your decision is very simple. Do I want to work there or not? And so, I think all of the devices from a functionality standpoint are perfectly capable in those regards. And productivity levels, compatibility, I can write a document in Pages and share it in Word or PDF or RTF or what have you. All of those things, numerous other examples. For the sake of time, that's all I'm going to say. But
this is David. Matt, it's really funny that you say that, some employers, you have to use what they're using, and others give you a choice. And I actually was in the latter camp with my last role at Comcast. When I was, before I even started working there, I was receiving some emails from the person who was then my manager. And one of the things he asked is, what do you want to use, a Mac or PC? And he even then said, this will shock you, Cliff, he even said, you seemed like a Mac guy to me. I don't know why he said that. I don't know what I said to, and although this may not make me friends with certain people on the panel, I said Windows. So, but Comcast had Mac users on our team. Yeah. And I could have used a Mac, and I thought about using a Mac and putting Windows on it, which there was some team members that did that, because we had to test primarily in Windows, although we did use some Mac. But I actually did have a choice, and I remember being so surprised. I wanted to write back and say, dude, what do you use? You tell me what I'm using, and they were really good about it. So I was really, really surprised.
You didn't talk too much about when you're going from Windows to Mac, the difference in drilling down several levels and then having to, can you talk a little bit about how difficult that is for some people to get used to, from going from Windows to PC, from Windows to Mac and then back?
It depends on the person, because...
But I found that, well, now I'm not going to talk about my personal...
Yeah.
But,
so what I tell people is, because I switched to the Mac from PC back in the day when there weren't support forums and trainers and stuff like that. So I was all self-taught. And the way that I handled it is I sold every PC I had, both laptops and my desktop. That way I wouldn't be tempted to go back if I got frustrated. Don't get me wrong. There were some days I wanted to throw that thing in the Mississippi, and I didn't even live by the Mississippi. So, but I was patient. I took my time, and eventually me and that Mac became friends, and I was able to do more on that than I could do on my PC. So the thing that I would tell people, if they want to make that transition, or if they want to make it a hobby and learn a new screen reader and operating system, that you have to be patient, because you did not learn JAWS and Windows overnight. You didn't learn it in 2 weeks. You didn't even learn it in a year. It takes time, because you have to get used to the muscle memory, the predictable patterns that you're going to use on either system, and whatever the case may be. The other thing that it's going to depend on is what are you going to the Mac for? Are you doing it for a hobby? Is it something for work? Is it something you want to do it? Is JAWS just getting on your nerves? I mean, that's where it's all going to start, because that's going to predict what kind of patience and dedication and commitment that you're going to make to learning that screen reader and machine, because their difference is not as they. Yes, they have similarities, caps lock, single key letter navigation, and whatever the case may be with some other stuff. But the bottom line is, if it's something that you have to do, then of course you're going to learn it. If it's just a hobby, okay, then that's going to be up to you on how fast you learn it, and be patient with the difficulty with it, because Mac is not easy.
And we just spoke to that, Cliff, we just spoke to that when we did that. I mean, it hasn't been released yet, but what you and I recorded yesterday about the predictable patterns, how with the Mac and iOS and so on, there are these basics, these fundamentals that you can master and then use just about anything. And, Cliff mentioned it took him, I think, something like 5 years to really become, or 4 years to really become comfortable on the Mac. And it took me about 3.5, so just slightly less than him, of course. I was just a little bit quicker. But
your mom was also a graphic designer on PC, so you had an advantage.
That's right. But yeah, I think it's exactly what he said. You got to just look at each one as its own entity. They're going to have their little quirks, their little things you've got to learn. But I guess at the end of the day, it's about having that positive, I'm going to do this attitude, rather than it being a potential frustration for you.
The one thing that I learned when I was learning the Mac, mostly on my own, but also through, at the time, David Woodbridge's tutorials. He was one of the people back in the I think I got a Mac where I used to work in maybe 2011. And one thing that I sort of realized was you can compare it to learning a different language. In high school, for a school year, I took a class in German. And German has a lot of similarities to English. And so because I know English, I could coast for a little bit, and the beginnings of German were easy, but there comes a point where you can't get angry and say, darn it, they put the adjectives in the wrong place in German, and the nouns are different, and they keep adding these weird genders to the nouns, and we don't do that in English. Why is that? And I realized that learning the Mac, and this is probably true going from Mac to Windows, that transition is very similar. There were some very nice similarities that I could latch on to and coast. But after a while, it gets to the point where you just have to say, a Mac is not Windows. VoiceOver is not JAWS any more than JAWS is like VoiceOver. And you've got to eventually stop coasting and say to yourself, I have to learn this as its own thing, the way it was designed to be used. And maybe some of those design choices don't make sense, and some of them actually did, and I really liked it. The irony, when you talk about drilling down, Viola, I think you're talking about interacting. And that is a very different way of, no pun intended.
I think that's the biggest struggle for everybody that comes from Windows.
Yeah.
It wasn't for me because I'm lazy and I use QuickNav, but that's a story for another day.
Yeah, but the irony is interacting on the Mac actually helped me to understand NVDA better, because NVDA uses a thing called object navigation. And when I first learned it, I thought, this makes no sense to me. I feel like I've got to turn my brain inside out for me to understand how this works. And I just put it on a shelf and just said, I don't get this. I'm just not dealing with it. One day I realized, object navigation is just like interacting on a Mac. It was a light bulb moment. And then it went from making no sense to 100%. So there are things on the Mac that are really, cursor navigation is another. It's very different from Windows, but there's a logic to it. And the iPhone, of course, uses the same thing by default.
Right. I couldn't have said it better myself. I think that was very, very well said, having to treat each one as its own, almost like learning a separate language. They are entirely separate entities. I think that's excellent advice. And I think that's a great way to cap our evening. And Dave Dean Teres, you can take us out. But I just want to say God bless you, everybody. It's been a lot of fun. And if you have any further questions you haven't gotten answered, you know how to get a hold of us, info@ttjtech.biz, or if you must boost Cliff's ego, info@stiritup.com. Remember, stir is spelled with a U, not an I, STURITUP.com.
Thank you for being a friend. Travel down the road and back again. Your heart is true, you're a pal and a confidant. I'm not ashamed to say, I hope it always will stay this way. My hat is off, won't you stand up and take a bow? And if you threw a party, invited everyone you knew, well, you would see the biggest gift would be for me, and the card attached would say, thank you for being a friend. Thank you for being a friend. Thank you for being a friend. Thank you for being a friend.
All right, great job, guys.